What would you do if the first face you saw after 5 years of blindness was a terrified child wearing a wedding dress and calling herself your wife? What would you do if the first face you saw after 5 years of blindness was a terrified child wearing a wedding dress and calling herself your wife? She never imagined her first time wearing white would feel like this. The hospital hallway was cold, lit by flickering fluorescents that hummed overhead. Nia Bennett stood alone, fingers curled into fists at her sides. The white dress hung awkwardly on her thin frame, cinched with safety pins at the waist. It wasn't her size. It wasn't her dress, and it certainly wasn't supposed to be her future. She was 14. Inside the room, just beyond the swinging doors, voices murmured in calm, clinical tones. Someone mentioned paperwork. A clipboard passed between a uniformed officer and a woman in scrubs. A pen clicked. A notary stood by the bed with solemn patience, waiting for a signature that should have never been requested in the first place. No one asked Nia if she was okay. No one even asked her name. Nia, her mother's voice hissed down the hallway, low and sharp. He's blind. He won't know the difference. Just go in, sit down, sign the paper. He's not going to live much longer anyway. Her mother's name was Clara Bennett. Sharp-eyed, sharper-tongued, and desperate. Desperate enough to push her youngest daughter into a lie big enough to swallow them all whole. Vanessa Bennett, Nia's older sister, the family jewel, was supposed to be the bride today. The one marrying the man in the hospital bed. But she'd vanished 3 hours ago along with her phone, her overnight bag, and, seemingly, her conscience. "You look just like her," Clara whispered, her nails digging into Nia's shoulder. "Don't ruin this." Nia's lips trembled. Her shoes didn't fit. The veil felt like a net caught in her braids. She wasn't ready. She would never be ready. Clara kept talking. "He's got no kids. That money could save us." "We're drowning, Nia. This is your chance to help your family." Help? Is that what this was? The man waiting inside was Mr. Elijah Lancaster once, the titan of a shipping empire, a man who owned homes in 5 countries and art signed by legends. But time had not been kind. Now 70, nearly blind, terminally ill, and surrounded by hospital wires instead of wedding bells, he was searching for something, or someone, to share his name with before he passed. He believed it would be Vanessa. And for a brief time, Vanessa believed she could go through with it. But reality crept up fast, and when she panicked and ran, Clara panicked harder and shoved Nia into her place. The door creaked open. "Nia Bennett?" the nurse called, holding a clipboard and smiling as if this were a normal Tuesday. Her knees wobbled, her breath caught. She stepped into the room. Elijah Lancaster sat propped in bed, clad in a charcoal suit jacket over a crisp white shirt. His sunglasses hid the faded cloud of his eyes, but his face bore the deep grooves of time liver spots on his hands, lines carved by both laughter and loss. He turned his head slowly toward her. "Vanessa?" he asked softly, his voice like gravel. Nia couldn't answer. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Officer Grant Marston stepped forward gently, placing a hand on her back. "Sir, this is your fiancé. We're ready to proceed." He guided her forward. Her legs moved mechanically, like they belonged to someone else. She sat beside the old man who would never see her face and laid her hand on the clipboard. A pen was placed in her trembling fingers. Miss Dana O'Connell, the notary, nodded at her encouragingly. Behind her, the 2 police officers stood like silent statues. One of them, Marston, again seemed uneasy. His gaze lingered on Nia, as if he knew something was wrong but said nothing. Maybe he'd been paid to stay quiet. Maybe he was just tired of asking questions. It didn't matter. This wedding was legal on paper at least. Nobody had asked for her birth certificate. Nobody had cared. Nia stared at the line where her signature was supposed to go. Her hand shook. Tears blurred her vision, I don't... She's just overwhelmed, Clara interrupted sharply, stepping in with a rehearsed smile. Tears of joy. She's a shy one. Elijah Lancaster turned his head in Nia's direction. He reached out a hand and placed it over her, cool, papery, and impossibly gentle. I don't need much, he said quietly. Just someone honest, someone kind. His words pierced deeper than the chill of the hospital air. Nia bit her lip. Her throat tightened. Her future felt like it was crumbling into dust under her shoes. She looked down at the form, at the name written in neat cursive, Vanessa Marie Bennett. That wasn't her name. But it was the name she signed. The applause was soft, awkward, a formality. The notary nodded. The officers signed as witnesses. Elijah Lancaster smiled faintly and whispered, "Thank you, my dear." And Nia broke. She turned her head away, silent sobs shaking her shoulders. The veil slipped. Her tears stained the white dress she never wanted to wear. The man she had just married couldn't see her pain, but the rest of the room, they saw it. And they ignored it. The applause faded quickly. There were no flowers. No music, no kiss to seal a vow, just paperwork. And a girl in shoes too big, signing someone else's name. The wedding of Mr. Elijah Lancaster and Vanessa Marie Bennett was recorded by the notary, witnessed by 2 officers, and finalized with the indifferent click of a pen lid. No photographer, no guests, no vows exchanged. Only legal boxes checked, signatures aligned, and time of completion marked 3:17 p.m. It was official, but it wasn't real. The nurse removed the clipboard and whispered something to Elijah about resting. He nodded faintly, his lips barely moving. His face was calm, almost peaceful, like a man who'd finally done what he came here to do. But the girl sitting beside him was shaking. Nia kept her eyes low, hoping no one could see the tears that still hadn't stopped. The thin fabric of the dress clung to her legs like a trap. Her spine ached from holding herself upright. Her lips were cracked from dehydration, and her throat still stung from the words she couldn't say. I'm not her. I'm a child. This is wrong. But no one had asked. So no one had to hear it. Outside the room, Clara Bennett waited with the hunger of someone watching a lottery ticket being scanned. When Nia emerged, her mother smiled, an ugly thing, stretched too tight across her face. You did good, Clara whispered, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her close. It's done now. Everything's going to be fine. Nia didn't speak. What was there to say? She had just married a man 5 times her age, a man who thought she was someone else. A man who couldn't see her, but had just been bound to her by law. And it wasn't over. That night, Clara brought Nia back to the hospital with a thermos of soup and a bouquet of supermarket flowers. Wife duties, she said, as if the title were a chore chart. You'll visit every day, Clara instructed. Make yourself useful. He likes chamomile tea at night, water by the bed. Ask the nurse if he took his meds, and smile more. He may not see you, but people around him can. The next day, Nia sat by Elijah's bedside in silence, and the day after that, and the one after that. Each visit, she brought something: tea, a book, a hand-drawn card her mother forced her to fake in Vanessa's name. Her voice remained soft, her presence quiet. She watched the nurses adjust his IV, watched Elijah nap in short stretches, and sometimes, when no one was watching, she cried. Never loudly, never visibly, but deeply. What surprised her most wasn't that Elijah never asked personal questions. It was that he seemed genuinely kind. Tired, yes. Frail, yes. But never cruel. He thanked her for the water. He asked how her day was, though she only ever answered with one-word replies. He spoke about music he missed hearing, cities he once loved, and meals he could no longer taste. And still, she said nothing real. Because how could she? She was his wife on paper, but a child in truth, and truth had no place here. 3 weeks passed like that. Nia stopped wearing the white dress. It stayed folded in a bag in the back of a closet. She started wearing her sister's old cardigans, trying to look older, quieter, more forgettable. She braided her hair back, removed the lip gloss her mother insisted on, and spent each day trying to disappear in plain sight. But people saw her. The nurses smiled with sympathy, the officers nodded in passing. They all assumed she was just a shy young bride caring for her sick husband. No one asked why she looked like a teenager. No one questioned why she never left his room without looking over her shoulder. Until one day she overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. "He's going in for surgery next month," a nurse said quietly at the station. "They've approved a donor cornea." "It's rare, but it might work." "Surgery?" Nia froze. Elijah Lancaster might be able to see again. Her stomach dropped. For weeks, she had existed inside this fragile web of lies, woven so tightly she could barely breathe. But the one thread that held it all together, the fact that Elijah was blind, was about to snap. If he opened his eyes and saw her face, the entire illusion would crumble. The guilt, long buried under fear, began to rise. What would he say? What would he do? Would he hate her? Would he turn her in? Would he scream? She tried to tell Clara. "He's going to see me," Nia whispered one night, standing in the kitchen with trembling hands. "He'll know." Her mother didn't even blink. "Then you better keep acting like his wife until then," Clara said, scraping burnt toast into the sink. "Smile. Sit straight. Don't give him a reason to doubt." Nia wanted to scream. Instead, she walked back to her room, closed the door, and curled under the covers, still wearing Vanessa's cardigan. And the days kept passing. The date of the surgery was marked on the hospital chart, June 12th. Nia counted down in silence. Each visit, she grew smaller inside. Each compliment Elijah gave her felt like a needle. Each thank you cut like glass. He trusted her. He thought she was someone else. And somehow that made it worse. Because Elijah Lancaster, this old, broken, forgotten man, was perhaps the only adult in her life who had spoken to her with gentleness. He never raised his voice, never told her she was stupid, never touched her without asking. And when he smiled at her, even though he couldn't see, she could tell it was real. It made the lie unbearable. And the guilt unbearable too. On the morning of June 12th, Nia sat beside his hospital bed for what might be the last time as a stranger. He reached for her hand. "You nervous?" he asked, chuckling. She nodded silently. He thought she was worried about him. He had no idea she was terrified of herself. Because if this surgery worked, if he saw her, he wouldn't see a loving bride. He'd see the truth, and the truth was, she was never his wife. She was just a little girl in someone else's place. There's something cruel about time when you're living inside a lie. It doesn't rush. It doesn't slow. It just presses. And for Nia Bennett, every minute after the wedding felt heavier than the last. The hospital had become a second home. Room 417, third floor, east wing. It smelled like bleach and artificial lemon and the quiet hum of machines that never stopped. She knew every nurse's shift rotation, which vending machine always jammed, and the exact sound Elijah's heart monitor made when he shifted in bed. She knew too much. And yet, she didn't know how to stop. Each morning, Clara Bennett handed her a thermos, a grocery store flour, and the same order she'd given since the wedding. Be sweet, be quiet, be grateful. Nia never answered. She'd just nod and walk out the door with a silence that felt more like survival than obedience. At the hospital, Mr. Elijah Lancaster greeted her the same way every day. "Good morning, my dear," he'd say with a faint smile. She never corrected him. Not once, not when he called her Vanessa, Not when he told the nurse she had a beautiful laugh. Not even when he asked if she remembered their first conversation, the one he'd actually had with her sister. Because how could she explain that she'd never spoken a word to him before signing his name on a marriage certificate? She just sat beside him, poured his tea, fluffed his pillows, listened to his stories. Sometimes he'd ask about her day, and Nia would lie gently, school she didn't attend, friends she didn't have, dreams that weren't hers. She invented pieces of Vanessa's life and wore them like armor. But it wasn't armor, it was a cage. Elijah, for all his age and illness, had a soft voice and a slower kind of presence, one that didn't rush or push. He was polite, always thanking her for every glass of water, every blanket adjustment. He asked her once if she played piano.
She said no. He smiled. I bet you could learn. It made something twist in her chest.
Not because he was wrong, but because he was kind. And in a world full of adults who used her voice, her face, her silence for their own gain, Elijah was the only one who never demanded anything. He simply talked and listened and waited. One evening, he told her about his first home, a small cabin in North Carolina, built by his father's hands. He spoke of firewood in winter and boiled peanuts in summer, and a mother who sang old church hymns while cooking Sunday stew. He chuckled when he mentioned his stubborn brother. He always ran toward trouble, Elijah said, shaking his head with a grin. And I always tried to fix it afterward. Some habits never die. Nia didn't say much. She just nodded. But something about the story stayed with her. The way Elijah looked backward, not with regret, but with reverence. As if life had taken much, but still left enough worth remembering. She wondered what she would remember someday. Would it be this half-marriage, this long waiting, this slow burn of guilt? A week before his surgery, Elijah asked to hold her hand. She hesitated but gave it to him. His fingers were cool, thin, fragile. He traced the lines of her knuckles gently and said, "You've got young hands." The sentence hung in the air. A full 5 seconds passed. Then he added, "Lucky you. Arthritis is a beast." Nia exhaled quietly, but her heart had already jumped into her throat. Did he know? Or was it just a passing comment? She couldn't ask. She didn't dare. That night, back at home, she stood in the bathroom staring at herself in the mirror. The girl looking back wore her sister's cardigan and a braid she didn't like. She had Vanessa's earrings, Clara's lipstick, and shoes that still didn't fit right. But her eyes were all hers. And they were tired. So tired. She took the earrings out, wiped the lipstick off, unbraided her hair. For the first time in weeks, she went to bed looking like herself. The next day, Elijah seemed more tired than usual. He winced when he sat up, coughed between sentences, and barely touched his tea. Nia helped him adjust his pillows, tucked his blanket around his legs, and sat with him in silence for nearly 2 hours. Before she left, he reached for her hand again. "Thank you," he whispered. Nia swallowed hard. For what? For staying. She blinked fast. "I didn't have a choice," she almost said, but didn't. Instead, she nodded once and left before her tears spilled. At home, Clara was in the kitchen talking on the phone with someone Nia didn't recognize. Her tone was brisk, sharp, full of phrases like "paperwork in progress" and "once he's gone, we'll handle the will." Nia didn't interrupt. She just walked past, unnoticed. She didn't feel like property anymore. She felt like inventory. 3 days before the surgery, Elijah surprised her with a gift. A book of poetry, bound in green leather, old and worn. He smiled as he handed it to her. "You don't talk much, but I think you feel a lot. That's the kind of person who likes poems." She opened it slowly. Inside the front cover, in faded ink, was written, "To see clearly is not always with the eyes. He chuckled.
My wife gave me that book long ago. She passed almost 15 years back, but I think she'd like you. Nia stared at the inscription, her fingers trembling. I'm not her, she wanted to say, but instead she whispered, thank you. That night, she read the book cover to cover. One poem in particular stayed with her. It said, they taught me silence to keep me safe, but I taught myself stillness to survive. She read it 3 times, then a 4th, then cried herself to sleep. The day before surgery, Elijah was unusually quiet. He didn't tell stories, didn't ask questions, just held her hand and sat with a peace that felt final. As she stood to leave, he said something soft. Nia? Her heart froze. It was the first time he'd ever used her real name. She turned slowly, but he was already asleep. The morning of the surgery arrived quietly. No fanfare. No drama. Just a soft dawn spilling through the hospital windows and a stillness that blanketed the world like freshly fallen snow. Nia sat in the same chair she always did, by the window in room 407, legs crossed, hands clutched tight around a paper cup of cold tea. Across from her, Mr. Elijah Lancaster rested beneath a thin hospital blanket, IVs hooked into both arms, a heart monitor blinking steadily beside him. She'd barely slept. Clara had fussed all night about what to say once Elijah could see again. Smile big, she'd snapped. He'll remember the shape of your mouth. Keep your shoulders back, don't stutter. If he asks your age, laugh it off. You're just petite. But Nia couldn't pretend anymore, not in her heart. Because what was coming wasn't just a surgery. It was an unveiling. And when the curtain lifted, there would be no hiding. A team of doctors arrived just before 7 a.m. Among them was Dr. Alma Rodriguez, a kind-eyed surgeon with hands like ice and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. She greeted Nia gently, then turned to Elijah with a quiet professionalism that inspired trust. Today's the day, Mr. Lancaster, she said. We'll take care of you. Elijah gave a slow nod. I'm ready. Nia stood as they began prepping him. Elijah turned his face toward her, though his eyes remained hidden behind dark glasses. You'll be here when I wake up? She swallowed. Yes. He smiled faintly. I'd like that. Then they wheeled him away, down the long hall, past the nurse's station, into the elevator, and just like that, he was gone. The next few hours felt like eternity. Nia waited in the hospital's family lounge, curled up in a corner chair, pretending to read the book of poetry Elijah had given her. But she couldn't focus. Every word blurred, every line felt hollow. Her fingers traced the faded inscription inside the cover. To see clearly is not always with the eyes. She wondered what he would see now. Would he still speak to her with that soft voice? Would he still smile? Would he even look at her? It wasn't until nearly 1 p.m. that the double doors swung open again, and Dr. Rodriguez emerged. Her surgical mask was lowered, her eyes creased with the smile of someone bearing good news. The procedure went better than expected, she said to the nurse. Minimal bleeding, no nerve damage. We'll begin removing bandages in 48 hours. Nia felt her chest rise and then collapse all at once. 48 hours. 2 more days of silence, 2 more days of pretending, and then the truth. She visited Elijah that evening. He was groggy but lucid, propped slightly on a pillow with a bandage wrapped around both eyes like a gauze crown. The room was quiet except for the soft beep of the monitor and the occasional creak of his bed. You're here, he said, voice hoarse. She nodded, then remembered he couldn't see. Yes, she whispered, his lips turned up. Good. They didn't talk much that night. Nia sat beside him and held his hand while he drifted in and out of sleep. She watched his chest rise and fall,
counted the freckles on his hand, noted the fine tremor in his fingers as he occasionally reached for water. She memorized him just in case he wasn't the same after this, or didn't want her anymore. 2 days later, the curtain lifted. Dr. Rodriguez and 2 nurses entered the room in the late morning, rolling in a small tray of instruments.
Nia stood in the corner, heart pounding so loudly she swore they could hear it. "Mr. Lancaster," the doctor said gently, "we're going to remove the bandages now."
"Please keep your eyes closed until I say." He nodded. One by one, the layers of gauze came off. The nurses worked with steady hands, speaking softly. When the final strip fell away, Dr. Rodriguez leaned in, her tone both firm and calm. "Okay, sir." "Slowly open your eyes." The room went silent. Elijah blinked. Once. Twice. Then again. Light flooded his pupils. His brows furrowed. He squinted against the brightness, and then a gasp. Not loud. Not panicked. Just breathless, as if something inside him had cracked. He looked toward the nearest movement, the corner where Nia stood frozen, his eyes locked onto her, and everything in the room stopped. He stared. She didn't breathe. This wasn't how she thought it would happen. No gentle reveal, no whispered explanation, just raw, immediate truth. A girl. Small. Frightened. 14. Not the woman he'd imagined, not the voice he remembered. Not Vanessa. "Who are you?" he asked softly. Nia opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. Tears pricked her eyes. She took a shaky step forward. I'm... He waited. "I'm Nia," she said at last. Silence. His face didn't twist with anger. His voice didn't rise. He just blinked once, slowly, and breathed out her name like a truth he didn't want. "But you married me." Her throat tightened. "I didn't want to. I didn't have a choice." That broke something in him. Not his trust. His heart. A nurse stepped forward, but Elijah lifted his hand. "It's okay," he said. Then turned back to Nia. His voice was quieter now. "How old are you?" She hesitated. Then whispered, 14. The air shifted. He closed his eyes, leaned back against the pillow, and exhaled harder as if the weight of it all had finally caught up. "God," he murmured. "God help us." The next hour unraveled fast. Doctors were called. Hospital administration notified. Nia sat outside the room, hugging her knees to her chest while nurses and security moved in and out. Clara's name was mentioned. So was Vanessa's. Words like fraud, coercion, illegal consent floated through the hallway. But Nia heard none of it. She just stared at her hands, the same hands that had held a pen she was too young to use. She waited for someone to scream at her, to arrest her, to hate her. But when the door opened again, and Mr. Elijah Lancaster looked at her with clear, tear-brimmed eyes, all he said was, "You shouldn't have been there." The hallway felt too bright, too loud, too real. Nia sat in a plastic chair just outside room 417, her knees pulled to her chest, the hem of her hoodie draped over her hands. Her eyes burned, not from tears, but from the fear that had been clawing at her chest for weeks, fear that had finally been set loose. He knew. He saw her, and everything had changed. Inside the room, Mr. Elijah Lancaster was no longer the quiet man in sunglasses and silence. He was awake, alert, and devastated. His voice hadn't risen. He hadn't screamed or called for security, but somehow that made it worse. He had just looked at her with eyes full of truth and said, "You shouldn't have been there." 15 minutes passed. Then 30. A nurse walked by and asked if she needed anything. Nia shook her head. She couldn't eat, couldn't drink, could barely breathe. What would happen now? Would he report her? Would she be taken away? Would Clara lie again? Would Vanessa come back? She didn't know. And for the first time since the wedding, she didn't care. She was tired of being scared. The door opened. Nia flinched, expecting a security guard, or worse, her mother. But it was Elijah's lawyer, Mr. Howard Greer. He wore a charcoal suit, a Bluetooth earpiece, and the kind of expression that looked like it had never smiled. "Come inside," he said. Nia stood slowly. Her legs shook. Inside the room felt different, not cold, not angry, just quiet. Elijah sat upright in bed, his eyes clear, knowing but sharp. Nia stood in the doorway, frozen. Mr. Greer stepped aside and left them alone. "Sit," Elijah said gently. She did. They were silent for a long time. He studied her face, really studied it for the first time. Not just the features, but the weight behind them, the fear, the sadness, the years of childhood that had been stripped away too soon. "I thought you were Vanessa," he said finally. Nia nodded, eyes downcast. I remember her voice, the lipstick. The way she laughed like she owned the room. Nia swallowed hard. "I'm not like her." "No," he agreed. "You're not." He paused. "You're quieter, softer. You don't look people in the eye." "I wasn't supposed to," Nia whispered. Elijah's brow furrowed. "Tell me the truth, all of it." So she did. She told him about the wedding, about the dress that didn't fit, the shoes that hurt, the name she signed that wasn't hers, the way Clara had pushed her into the room like a pawn on a chessboard. She told him about the tea, the flowers, the daily visits, how she'd sat beside him for weeks pretending to be someone she wasn't, afraid that the truth would destroy them both. "I wanted to tell you," she said, her voice cracking, "but I didn't know how." Elijah didn't move. "Why did you stay?" he asked. Nia looked up, finally meeting his eyes. "Because you were the only person who didn't lie to me." The words hung in the air, heavy and true. He didn't respond right away. He just leaned back against the pillow and closed his eyes. Nia stood to leave, but his voice stopped her. "How old are you really?" She hesitated. Then quietly, 14. A long silence followed. When Elijah finally opened his eyes again, they glistened with something between sorrow and resolve. "You've been a child pretending to be a woman," he said. "And I've been a man pretending not to notice." She blinked. "Are you going to have me arrested?" He looked startled. "God, no." He reached for her hand, not forcefully, but slowly, gently, like someone asking for permission. She didn't pull away. "I was blind," he said. "But not just in my eyes." He looked at her again, really looked. "I see now. Not just your face, but your truth. And I'm sorry." The door opened again. Mr. Greer returned with a stack of documents in hand. "I've filed the annulment," he said. "Everything will be voided by morning." Nia felt her breath hitch. It was over. The wedding, the lie, the weight of pretending, gone. But with that relief came something else. A hollow ache. Because despite the lie, despite the fear, despite the impossible wrongness of it all, Elijah had been kind to her. Kind in a way no one else had ever been. And now that kindness was fading too. But Elijah wasn't done. "I've also made another request," he said. Nia looked up. "I filed a petition for guardianship." She blinked. "What?" His voice was quiet, but steady. "You said you had no choice." "No one to protect you. Well, now you do." Nia shook her head, confused. "But you don't have to." "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said. "I know you never once asked me for anything. I know you brought tea and flowers you couldn't afford. I know you sat beside a dying man, not because you had to,
but because you didn't know where else to go. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm not trying to replace your family, he said. I'm trying to be the one thing they never were safe. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just nodded, slowly, like someone finally waking up after a long nightmare. Outside, rain began to fall, a soft, steady rhythm against the window pane. Inside, a man who once believed he had no one, and a girl who once believed she was nothing, sat in silence, together, not as husband and wife, but as two broken souls finally being seen. There's a kind of silence that only comes after the truth explodes. It isn't peaceful. It's tense, tight, like the air is holding its breath. That's how the hospital felt the next morning when Mr. Elijah Lancaster's annulment papers were filed and his private legal team began untying the knots Clara Bennett had spent months weaving. It started with the marriage certificate. The name Vanessa Marie Bennett was signed in Nia's small, uneven handwriting. It didn't match the signature on Vanessa's ID, not even close. Next came the witness statements. Officer Grant Marston, under internal investigation, admitted he felt something wasn't right, but said he was told to stay quiet, that someone had paid him to look the other way. Then came the birth records. Nia Bennett, born May 12, age 14. No legal guardian present at the time of the wedding. No consent. No verification. No questions asked. It unraveled fast. Elijah watched it all unfold with a quiet fury. He had once built empires from nothing container ships, international ports, and multi-million-dollar deals. But this betrayal, this exploitation of a child under the guise of love and legality, it was the one deal he couldn't leave untouched. I signed that paper blind, he told his lawyer, Mr. Howard Greer, but now I see everything. Within 48 hours, the state prosecutor was notified. A case was opened under child coercion and fraudulent marriage consent. Elijah gave a sworn statement, so did Nia. The hospital turned over surveillance footage. The notary, Ms. Dana O'Connell, was suspended pending investigation, and Officer Marston, who had quietly helped facilitate the wedding, was placed on administrative leave. But the real firestorm? That began when Clara Bennett was called in. She didn't arrive humble. She didn't arrive scared. She arrived furious. "This is nonsense," she hissed in the hallway outside Elijah's room. "You told me you wanted companionship. You wanted family. That's what you got." "You gave me a lie," Elijah said coldly. "And you used a child to deliver it," Clara scoffed. "She signed the papers. She didn't know what she was signing. She never said no. She was terrified." Their voices didn't rise, not like in movies. It was colder than that, sharp, legal, final. Then Clara made a mistake. She turned to Nia, who stood near the doorway, silent.
"This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Clara snapped. "To be taken care of. To live in a fancy house."
"Well, congrats, you fooled him better than I ever could." Elijah stood, all 70 years of him, worn but unbending. "Get out," he said. Clara tried to argue, but security was already walking down the hall. "Don't come near her again," Elijah added. "I'll see you in court," Clara spat. "You already are." That night, the headlines hit local media. Millionaire's wedding scandal. Bride was 14-year-old forced into marriage. Mother under investigation for child exploitation scheme. The story spread fast. Elijah's lawyers took control of the narrative, issuing a single statement. Mr. Lancaster was misled, but not anymore. He is cooperating fully with authorities to ensure justice is served, not just for himself, but for the young girl at the heart of this deception. And as the pressure mounted, Vanessa vanished. Her phone was disconnected. Her social media wiped clean. A bus ticket to Arizona was found under her name, but no one could confirm if she'd made it there. Clara claimed she hadn't heard from her either, but no one believed her anymore. Not the police, not Elijah, and certainly not Nia. In the days that followed, Nia didn't speak much. She watched as adults argued, lawyers circled, and cameras blinked from across the street. She stayed in Elijah's guest room, slept under a real quilt for the first time, ate hot meals she didn't cook, and tried to remember what it felt like to be a kid. Sometimes she sat on the porch with him in the evenings, watching the light shift across the sky. He didn't ask questions. He just poured her tea. Let her be quiet. Let her breathe. One afternoon, a child protection officer named Miss Lorna Wells came to visit. She was kind, sharp-eyed, and firm. "We need to talk about guardianship," she said. "You don't have a safe legal guardian right now. The court will need to decide what happens next." Nia nodded. "Ms. Wells turned to Elijah. "You're filing to be her legal guardian?" He nodded once. "I am." "You understand what that entails?" "I do." "You're 70 years old." "I'm also healthy, retired, and surrounded by a support network. And I'm not blind anymore." Miss Wells studied him carefully, then turned back to Nia. "Do you want this?" she asked gently. Nia hesitated, then looked up at Elijah. His face was steady, not expectant, not pushing. "Just present," she nodded. Yes, that moment didn't solve everything. But it was the beginning of something real, something earned. Not stolen, not faked, not forced. 3 weeks later, Clara was formally charged. Her bail was denied, a trial date was set. The house she once ruled over sat dark and empty, the front porch cluttered with mail no one picked up. Vanessa remained missing. And Nia, she was still healing, but for the first time in her life, she wasn't doing it alone. In a quiet kitchen with windows that faced the morning light, Elijah poured 2 mugs of tea. One for him, one for the girl who was no longer a bride, just a child. Just herself. The courtroom was quiet now, the cameras were gone. The lawyers had left, the reporters had moved on to the next scandal. But inside a modest home, nestled just outside the city, a silence lingered. Not the kind that smothered, but the kind that held space for healing, for breath, for truth. Nia Bennett sat at the small round table in Elijah Lancaster's kitchen. The window beside her let in soft golden light. Outside, birds fluttered in the bird bath. Inside, the smell of chamomile drifted from 2 mugs on the table, one in front of her, one in front of him. He had made it the way she liked it. 2 sugars, no lemon, he didn't ask. He just remembered. That was the kind of man Elijah had become. For a long while they didn't speak. She stirred her tea with the spoon, round and round. The quiet wasn't awkward, it was careful. Elijah sat across from her in a sweater and soft slacks, eyes clear now, though ringed with the kind of tiredness that doesn't come from sleep but from regret. Finally, he broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," he said. Nia looked up, her fingers stilled on the spoon. "For what?" He folded his hands in front of him, as if the words needed holding. "For not asking more questions, for trusting too easily, for letting something so deeply wrong happen under my roof, under my name." Nia looked at him, brow gently furrowed. "You didn't know." "I should have," he said, voice soft. "I spent a lifetime reading contracts, decoding lies in boardrooms. But when it mattered most, I didn't look close enough." He paused. "I thought I was lonely. I thought I just needed someone to share my name. And that blinded me far more than any illness ever could." Nia swallowed hard. She didn't want to cry, not here, not now. But there was something about hearing a grown man apologize, truly apologize, that pulled at a place deep inside her that had always felt invisible. She looked down at her tea, then whispered, "I forgive you." Elijah blinked. "I didn't expect that," he said gently. "I didn't expect you to see me," she replied.
They both smiled.
Not wide, but real. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly.
You've been through more in 14 years than most people face in a lifetime. And still you show up. You sit across from me. You drink tea like the world didn't try to break you.
It almost did, she said honestly. Why didn't it? She paused, considering. Because you stopped it. You saw me when no one else did. A silence passed between them again, but this time it felt safe. Then Elijah chuckled softly. You know, he said, when I first woke up after the surgery and saw your face, I didn't know what to think. You were just a blur, small, afraid. He looked her in the eyes. But I've never seen anyone more clearly than I see you now. Nia smiled. It was small, unsure, but it reached her eyes. You're not what I expected either, she said. Oh? You're quieter, softer. I thought rich people yelled more, he laughed. I used to. Ask my old assistant. Do you miss that life? He sipped his tea. Thought for a moment. No, he said finally. That life was full of noise. Expensive distractions. People who smiled too wide and cared too little. This? He gestured around the kitchen. This is real. She nodded. I don't know what's next, she admitted. You don't have to, he replied. You're allowed to just be. They sat in silence a little longer. Then Nia asked the question that had been sitting on her chest for days. Why did you want to be my guardian? Elijah didn't rush his answer. Because I saw a child who had no one in her corner. And because I believe family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose to stay, even when they don't have to. He paused, voice gentler now. I couldn't undo what was done, but I could give you something better than a legal rescue. I could give you a place where you're not used, not watched, not pushed. A place where you're simply safe. She nodded, tears threatening again. No one had ever talked about safety like that before. Not as a promise. Not as a gift. She wanted to believe him. She really did. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to. Later that afternoon, Elijah asked if she wanted to walk the garden path out back. She agreed. They strolled in silence, the gravel crunching beneath their feet, the wind gentle against their skin. He didn't hold her hand. He didn't guide her. He simply walked beside her, matching her pace, respecting her rhythm. And for the first time since that awful day in the hospital, Nia felt something shift in her chest. Not fear, not tension, just breath. When they returned to the porch, she turned to him. Thank you, she said. For what? For seeing me. Not what I was told to be. Not what people expected me to fake. Just me. He smiled. I wouldn't want anyone else. As the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft with amber and blue, Nia leaned back in her chair and let herself believe something radical. That maybe the worst part of her story was over. And maybe, just maybe, the healing had already begun. The courtroom wasn't grand. No marble pillars. No golden scales. Just 4 beige walls, a tired judge, and 2 lives waiting to be redefined. Nia sat beside Mr. Elijah Lancaster, her hands folded in her lap, her heart beating loud enough she was sure the court clerk could hear it. She wore a pale blue dress, nothing fancy, but the kind of thing you wear when something matters. Because today did matter. Not because of what they were losing, but because of what they were about to claim. The annulment had already been finalized. Signed, filed, closed. The judge had reviewed the marriage documents, the statements, the forensic evidence. There had been no opposition, no confusion, only fact. The marriage had never been real. But what followed had been. Judge Thomas Everett adjusted his glasses as he looked between the two. Elijah Lancaster, he said, you are 70 years old, a widower, and legally blind until just over a month ago.
Are you sure you understand what you're petitioning for? I do, Elijah answered, calm and steady. You are requesting full legal guardianship of Miss Nia Bennett, age 14, who until recently was placed in your care under highly unusual circumstances. Elijah nodded. Yes, sir. Judge Everett narrowed his eyes. Why? It wasn't accusatory, it was curious, honest. The way someone asks not out of suspicion, but out of human interest. Elijah didn't hesitate. Because when I opened my eyes after surgery, the first face I saw was hers. And it didn't belong to the woman I thought I married. It belonged to a child scared, silent, and stronger than anyone should have to be at her age. He glanced at Nia. She didn't ask to be brought into my life. But she stayed, even when she could have run. She never lied to protect herself. She lied to protect everyone else. And once I knew the truth, she didn't try to defend it, she simply told it. He paused. I want to give her something no one else has ever offered her, a safe home. Not as a reward. Not out of guilt, but because I choose her. The judge looked at Nia. And you, Miss Bennett? Is this what you want? Nia took a breath. She didn't look at Elijah. She didn't need to. Yes, Your Honor, she said clearly. It's the first thing I've wanted that felt like it was really mine. The courtroom fell quiet. Even the clicking of the clerk's keys paused. Then Judge Everett smiled, just faintly. Then by the power vested in this court, I hereby approve Mr. Elijah Lancaster as the legal guardian of Miss Nia Bennett, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a soft thud. It was done, not a marriage, not a mistake. Not a cover-up, but a beginning. Outside, the air smelled like spring. Like things growing again. Nia stood on the courthouse steps in that pale blue dress, clutching a manila envelope with her new legal documents inside. Next to her, Elijah stood tall, not in stature but in presence. Not as a billionaire, not as a husband, but as a father, or at least something close to it. You all right? He asked gently. She nodded. Then handed him the envelope. It's yours too now, she said. He looked down at it. No, he replied. It's ours. They went to a small diner afterward, not fancy. Not even particularly clean, but the waitress knew Elijah by name and called Nia sweetheart when she brought their milkshakes. They sat in a booth by the window. 2 milkshakes, 2 hearts still healing, and no lies between them. For the first time, Nia asked Elijah about his wife, the one before the surgery, before the silence, before the strangers. He told her about long walks in Central Park, crossword puzzles in bed, and the way she made chicken pot pie on Sundays whether they liked it or not. She would have liked you, he said. Why? Because you don't try to impress anyone. Nia smiled. That's mostly because I don't know how. He laughed. Even better. That night, back home, Nia placed the court papers in the drawer beside her bed. She didn't frame them, didn't take pictures, she just kept them close. Because they weren't for show, they were for her. Proof that someone had chosen her. Not because of her face, not because of what she could offer, not because of some twisted deal, but because she mattered. A few days later, they went shopping for school supplies. Elijah insisted on letting her pick everything. The backpack, the pens, the notebooks, even the lunchbox. She chose one with sunflowers. Symbolic? He asked. She shrugged. Just pretty. He smiled. When they got to the checkout line, he handed her his card. Want to try your first signature as a Bennett Lancaster? She blinked. What? I know it's not legal yet, he said, but one day it will be. She smiled, cheeks burning, and signed. That night, she couldn't sleep, not because of nightmares, but because for the first time she was actually excited to wake up. The first morning of normal didn't feel very normal. Nia woke before the sun came up. She lay there under soft quilts in a room that smelled faintly of lavender and old books, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow, rhythmic circles above her. For a moment, she didn't move, not because she was tired, but because she didn't have to. There were no orders waiting. No voices yelling through a thin bedroom wall. No weight of a wedding dress pinned to her shoulders. Just silence. And the sound of a coffee machine downstairs. Elijah Lancaster was already awake. He always was. Old habits, he'd said. He'd been rising with the sun since his Navy days, before the ships, before the boardrooms, before the wealth. But these days, his mornings looked a little different. Instead of meetings and mergers, there were grocery lists and mail checks. A new schedule hung on the fridge, spelling out doctor's appointments, meal plans, and one brightly coloured calendar block that read, First day of school, 8:00 a.m. Nia stood in the kitchen doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder. Her new backpack, her new jeans, her new chance. Elijah turned around with a soft smile. Toast? She nodded. Butter and cinnamon. You got it. The car ride was quiet, but not in a tense way, just peaceful. Nia looked out the window, watching the world move, kids biking to school, joggers with headphones, a mom kissing her toddler goodbye at daycare. It felt like she was watching life through glass, except this time she wasn't locked out of it. She was in it. When they reached the school, Elijah pulled to the curb. You nervous? He asked. She nodded. That's okay. You'll find your way. She looked at him, then at the other students pouring out of cars. What if they ask where my parents are? He considered that. Tell them the truth, he said. She raised an eyebrow. That you live with a retired old man who makes bad tea but keeps the good snacks? She laughed, then opened the door. Before she left, he called after her. And Nia? She turned. You've already survived more than anyone in that building. You've got nothing to prove. She didn't answer. But her smile said everything. School was strange, in the best way. No one knew her past. No one knew her story. She was just Nia. The new girl with sunflower notebooks and a sharp memory for names. She wasn't loud. She wasn't flashy. But people noticed her. The girl who always thanked the lunch lady, who helped a classmate pick up dropped books, who stayed behind after class to ask if the teacher needed help wiping the whiteboard. Kindness, Elijah told her, was the quietest kind of power. She believed him. In the afternoons, she walked home. Elijah offered to pick her up, but she liked the walk. It gave her time to breathe between the world of kids and the safety of home. The neighborhood wasn't fancy, but it was safe. She liked the neighbor with the blue door and too many potted plants. The mailbox shaped like a dolphin 3 blocks down. The bakery that always smelled like warm cinnamon and yeast. One day she used her lunch money to buy a single cupcake. She didn't eat it. She brought it home and put it on the table in front of Elijah. You like lemon, right? He blinked. I do. She shrugged. Thought so. Evenings were slow and soft, homework at the kitchen table, TV on low volume. Sometimes classical music if Elijah was in a nostalgic mood. They didn't always talk much, but they didn't need to. Some days, Elijah would read aloud from the newspaper. Other days, Nia would share something funny from school, like the time her math teacher tripped over a desk and just kept lecturing like nothing happened. He didn't even flinch, she laughed. True professional, Elijah said. One night, Nia asked about the stars. They were sitting on the back porch, warm cocoa in hand. You ever name them? She asked. The stars? Yeah. Like that one's Henry, that one's Gloria. Elijah grinned. Never tried. She pointed. That one's mine, she said. Not the biggest, not the brightest. But it's always in the same spot when I need to find my way home. Elijah followed her gaze, then nodded. Then that one's yours, he said. She didn't call him Dad, not yet, maybe not ever. But she started calling him something new. Home.
On a Thursday afternoon, a letter came in the mail. It was from the state, a confirmation. The guardianship was now permanent.
No contest, no complications, just a quiet piece of paper that said, "This child belongs here."
With this man, in this house. Elijah didn't throw a party. He just put the letter on the fridge with a sunflower magnet and said, "Well, looks like you're officially stuck with me." Nia grinned. I could do worse. That weekend, they painted her room. Not beige, not grey, but soft green, like new leaves in spring. Elijah stood on the ladder while Nia directed from below. Left. No, my left. Your right. That's what I said. No, you said okay. Just hand me the roller. They laughed. They splattered paint. They made a mess. It was perfect. That night, before bed, Elijah knocked gently on her door. She opened it, already in pajamas, hair wrapped in a soft scarf. I forgot to ask, he said. Did you want a nightlight? She tilted her head. Do I need one? He smiled. Not anymore. And for the first time since she was dragged into a lie, she never chose. Nia slept in a room she could finally call her own, and dreamed of stars she didn't have to name, because she already had a home. The auditorium smelled like waxed floors, folding chairs, and too much hairspray. Families filled the Rosemothers fixing ties, grandparents clutching bouquets, phones raised and ready to capture the moment. Up on stage, a sea of teenagers waited in matching white gowns and flat caps, sloughing, whispering, fidgeting. And somewhere in the middle of them stood Nia Bennett, 14 years old, hair tucked neatly beneath her cap. Eyes scanning the crowd, she spotted him in the front row, Mr. Elijah Lancaster, wearing a navy blazer that didn't quite fit anymore, glasses slightly askew, and a proud smile so big it softened every line of his face. When she saw him, her shoulders relaxed. She was where she belonged. Class of the year, the principal announced. Please rise. Nia stood. The students began walking one by one, name after name, echoing through the speakers, applause rising and falling like a wave. Nia clutched the edge of her gown. She had worn white once before, but it hadn't felt like this. Back then, it had been a costume, a lie, a trap wrapped in satin and pins. Today, it was a symbol of survival, of truth, of choice. And now, the announcer called, we honor the final student in our graduating class. A pause. Miss Nia Bennett Lancaster. The name echoed across the room. It was the first time she had ever heard it out loud in full. Bennett for where she came from. Lancaster for where she was going. She stepped forward. Applause swelled. Phones flashed. But she didn't look at the crowd. She looked at him. Elijah had risen to his feet. Everyone else was still sitting, clapping politely. But he stood. Tears welled in his eyes, and he didn't bother to hide them. Because he had watched her walk once before down a hospital corridor into a future no child should ever face. And now she was walking again. But this time, it wasn't toward a marriage she never chose. It was toward her life. When she stepped off the stage, diploma in hand, she found him waiting by the exit. He opened his arms. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight into them. They held each other tightly, no words, no explanations, just presence. I'm proud of you, he whispered. I know, she said. Outside, the sun was warm and golden. Balloons bobbed in the breeze, and laughter drifted through the parking lot. Someone handed Nia a flower, then another. Her hands were full in minutes. Students called her name, teachers patted her shoulder, but it wasn't until she reached Elijah's car that the moment truly sank in. He opened the back door. Inside was a small white box tied with ribbon. She raised an eyebrow. Another gift. Just a little something. She opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in tissue paper,
was a silver necklace. A small sunflower charm dangled from the chain. She held it up. Elijah shrugged. "You named that star? Figured you should wear it too." Nia smiled. Then, without asking, clasped it around her neck. That evening, they sat on the porch as the light faded. No words, just the familiar sounds of summer. Cicadas in the trees, a dog barking in the distance, ice clinking in glasses of lemonade. After a while, Nia spoke. "You remember the day we met?" Elijah chuckled. "You mean the day you were forced to marry me?" She grinned. "Yeah. That one. I remember thinking your voice sounded too young to belong to the woman I'd been talking to. And I remember thinking your sunglasses looked too cool for a hospital bed." They both laughed, then grew quiet again. "I don't think I ever thanked you," she said. "For what?" "For choosing me, even after you didn't have to." He looked at her. "I didn't choose you out of pity, Nia. I chose you because you reminded me that there's still good left in this world." He paused, "and because I finally saw someone worth standing for." The stars came out one by one. She pointed at hers. "Still there," she whispered. "Always will be." And just like that, the girl who had once been a shadow in someone else's wedding dress became a light all her own. In a world where cruelty often hides behind legality and silence, one act of kindness can change everything. Nia's story reminds us that healing doesn't always begin with medicine or time sometimes. It begins with someone who simply chooses to care. Mr. Elijah Lancaster could have turned away. He had every reason to be betrayed, deceived, and aging. But instead, he chose compassion. Not out of obligation, not because of blood, but because he saw her a child lost in a world of adult selfishness. And in seeing her, he gave her something no one else did. A safe place to belong. For older viewers, this story hits home. It speaks to the power we still hold, not in wealth or youth, but in wisdom and presence. We may not be able to fix the world, but we can show up for someone who needs us. And often, that's more than enough. Because love, in its truest form, isn't loud or flashy. It's steady, it's chosen. And it's never too late to give it or to receive it.